Take one.
During the last decade, I have written at least 8 commentaries for the plain dealer, troublemaking punk, and liberation brew about the murders of African American people by police or people playing police. Tamir, Trayvon, Michael Brown, Jamar Clark, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, Eric Garner, George Floyd, Philando Castile, Ahmaud Arbery, etc., etc., etc. If I weren't so frustrated, I would be tired. But not as tired as all my black sisters and brothers must be. Over 30 years ago, at the end of the brilliant film Cry Freedom about apartheid martyr Bantu Steve Biko and his white ally Donald Woods, the filmmakers ran a list of people who had died in police custody in South Africa over a number of years, with an inspirational African anthem playing in the background. It listed the names and the official excuse for each person's death as it went on and on for a number of minutes. It seems to me we could make 100 movies in the United States, or maybe even 1,000, with such lists running hour after hour, and we would not be able to list all the African Americans killed by authorities or those protected by authorities in our history. Over 40 years ago, an African American man in his early 40s was generous enough to share his story with my sociology class. At 19, he'd been arrested for a minor offense for which he was never convicted. But because of the attitude problem he was told he had, he spent the next 13 years in prison fighting back against police brutality. The year before, a black activist acquaintance of mine who did not get along with the police reportedly hanged himself while in police custody. Many years later, one of my clients told me of a gathering he was taken to as a 13-year-old around 1960. Not 1920, not 1860, 1960. It seemed to be just a big pig roast. But right after he arrived, this 13-year-old was handed a gun and led inside an adjoining wooded area. Just inside the trees, he looked up and saw 2 black men hanging. He was immediately ordered by the accompanying adult to shoot the men, though they were both obviously dead. Those adults passed on their prejudices and their guilt to him by making him an accessory in the crime, which he then carried with him for the next 30 years. All of us with white privilege continue to carry that legacy and the accompanying ignorance till we face and learn to challenge both our own and this society's ongoing racism. Racism and the resulting violence that enforces it is the stain, the toxin that has always been a part of this country's identity. There was only one way to rationalize the violent appropriation of the First Peoples' lands and the enslavement of a whole people for the sake of profit. USA, America, equals racism. We'd like to be associated with democracy and the rule of law, but the most constant reality is USA, America, equals racism. Study after study shows that it is prevalent in the justice system, in employment, in housing, in the healthcare system, in the education system, and all our cultural systems, just as with the longer and deeper issue of sexism and related issues. Racism is in almost every corner and crevice of our existence. The question now is, do we as a culture, as a people, have the courage to address this fully and actively work to change it? Are each of us willing to do the work on ourselves? Do we have the courage to face reality and encourage our national government to issue an apology for not just the original sins of our founding forebears, but the ongoing transgressions our culture has committed over the last 160 years against our sisters and brothers of color? Let me be clear. I feel no guilt for any actions of anybody but myself. I'm not asking you to feel guilty for the actions of anyone who came before you. I'm asking you to face the harm it has done and how it affects all of us today. I'm asking each of us to take responsibility now, to work to fully face the stain of our country's racism, and join together and take action and work to finally get this horrid toxin out of our system. I'm River Smith with a comment for Liberation Brew and TroublemakingPunk.org.